Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this Americans for Peace Now webinar. I am Ori Nir, and with me is Hadar Suskind, APN's President and CEO. Before we introduce our guest today, our usual housekeeping notes. We're recording this webinar. There's going to be an audio recording and a video recording. The video will be on our YouTube channel, the audio on our podcast, Peacecast. You will find it there hopefully sometime later today. If not, then definitely tomorrow. If we told you a year ago, or even 6 months ago, that hundreds of thousands of liberal Israelis would go out to the streets to protest their government for 18 weeks going, every Saturday night and midweek as well sometimes, you'd probably say that we're dreaming. Israelis, particularly liberal Israelis, have been perceived for years as uninvolved, depoliticized, even apathetic to public life. First came the shock of the magnitude of this protest, the shock of how organized and disciplined the protesters are, and then the wonder regarding the stamina, the perseverance of this movement. And another fascinating phenomenon is the popular grassroots character of the movement. People are not following a leader or a group of leaders or something like that. They just show up, sometimes spontaneously show up, and sometimes following some guidelines that they get from social networks. Still, several organizers and activists have emerged as inspirational leaders of this powerful movement. Perhaps the most prominent of them is Shikma Bressler. She's a physicist by profession, a longtime activist in the movement that protested Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption, the Black Flags. She's a mother of 5 girls and a former basketball star. Before she gets on the stage, I was told by people who are always at the first row, they told me, before she gets on the stage to wow the audience, she jumps in place to warm up, and then she gets there and gives her very inspirational speech. So if there's one iconic leader to this protest movement or this resistance movement, or whatever you'd call it, it is Shikma Bressler, and we're extremely fortunate to have her with us today. Before I let Hadar, I hand on the baton to Hadar, I said earlier 2 notes, and I only gave you 1 note. So the 1 note is that it's recorded. The other note is that you are welcome to ask questions. You do that with the Q&A tool that's at the bottom of your screen, and you can do it anytime beginning now. Hadar.
Thank you, Ori. Thank you, Shikma, for being with us today. I don't want to take too much of the time because we want to hear from you, but I just want to say again a thank you for your leadership, for what you're doing. I have been lucky enough to be there for a few of the protests in Tel Aviv and to see you there and your partners in this, and the energy of it is really just unbelievable, unlike anything I've seen before, and the diversity of the crowd coming together, speaking up and saying, this is unacceptable, what's happening, and we want to see change, and we're going to come out day after day, week after week to make that change. It's just incredibly impressive. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for being with us here today. And I just want to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about this movement, about what's happening, why, how, what are the goals, anything else you want to share?
Sure, thanks. And I'm happy to be here. Just to say that, you said that I'm a long-going social activist, and it's weird to think of me as such, because I've never been a social activist in my life. It just happened to be that actually during COVID days, we had a conversation. It was the first COVID lockdown, so no one knew what's going to happen. There was no vaccination. We were just forced to be locked in our houses. We really didn't follow this instruction. We were sitting, all my brothers and myself and our families, of course, at my parents' house, and discussed what's going to be the next step. Are they going to, so Netanyahu's trials was supposed to begin a couple of days later. And I was asking kind of naively, so what would be the next step? Are they going to lock down courts? And my dad said, no way. And at the same night, they actually locked down courts. I think that we are the only country in the world, certainly the only democratic one, whose courts were locked down, effectively locked down during COVID days. And it was just 2 days literally before Netanyahu trial was supposed to begin. And then during the continuation of that same week, Yariv Levin asked or forced or encouraged the guy who was back then, Yuli Edelstein, who was back then the chair of the parliament, to not follow the Supreme Court decision and not call for an election for being replaced. It was after the, I think, 3rd elections in a row. We had no government, basically no elected government. All the ministers that we had there were basically selected by Netanyahu based on personal loyalty and not loyalty to the people. And at the same week, we found ourselves without courts and without basically an active parliament, because in Israel, if you don't elect a new chair for the government, you cannot form the government committees whose role is to supervise decision-taking or criticize decision-taking by the government. So if you are familiar with the Israeli regime, I don't know, the constitutional structure or whatever, Israeli democracy relies on balancing between the 3 authorities, and we were effectively left with one at 1 week. This one was only the government, which was strongly led by Netanyahu, who was not elected basically back then. And it was all done on the when on the background you should think of, you know, the first COVID days, so like emergency days. And for us who were not active at all, the fact that we were able to identify in advance the red line of crossing that could be crossed, of locking down courts, and we saw it in action, I think this what, you know, forced us to do something. And I'm telling you that because when we were the next day, we were calling people to join us for a rally to the Knesset. We could not have protests because we are not allowed to gather together. We said, okay, each person take his car, come with a black flag, and we just make like a convey to the parliament to awaken the people there or whatever. What we were actually calling was democratia. It was later become, and by the way, thousands of Israelis joined us back then at that day. It was our first experiences as protesters or social activists, and we found ourselves essentially leading thousands of people who were, I think that what was happening is that if people like ourselves who were, as you said, never involved, felt that we must do something, it just reflects the feeling of many other people who just joined. And I'm telling you that because what we were identifying back then, and we were asked people to come with black flags. So in Israel, black flags are 2 things. One, they are a show of risk. We put a black flag when the sea is danger or is stormy, just to tell people get away. I mean, the sea is dangerous. And there is another way, time or reason to raise black flag is, and this is when an illegal command is given to soldiers or officers. And when an illegal command is given, it means, or the terminology that we used, or the term is that a black flag is raised on top of this command, and then it's not that you are not, you can choose if to obey. You are forced not to obey by law for an illegal command with a black flag raised on top of it. So we called people to come with black flags because we saw the risk to Israeli democracy and the call of the people, democratia, that you can hear on the street. I shouted it back then already 3 years ago. And just to say that once the Bennett-Lapid government was formed, we actually stopped all of our activities. We shut down the small, I don't know the term, but חברה לטובת ציבור that we opened. So this, I don't know.
Non-profit organization.
Yeah. Exactly, non-profit organization that we issued for that purpose. And each of us went back to our own houses, and we only resumed activities prior to the last elections. And of course, not us, but millions, literally, hundreds of thousands of other people find themselves becoming all of a sudden active, not after the last government was formed, but actually because if you listen carefully to Netanyahu's speech at the day of forming the new government, he was speaking of 4 points that the government is going to deal with, which had to do with Iran, of course, and the crisis that we have about the cost of housing and the insecurity that people feel when walking in the streets, the internal security, and I think the other was the cost of life, basically. So he was pointing toward these 4 points, but only a couple of days later, a week later or so, Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice, actually gave his own speech saying that they are going to perform a judicial reform, which is actually a coup, if you look into it very carefully. And then Esther Hayut, the president of the Supreme Court, gave a speech explaining the meaning of what Yariv Levin's plans are. And that gave rise to tons of different grassroots organizations. You could see all of a sudden groups of lawyers, groups of academia people, groups of doctors. And when some people around here who were familiar with our activities or involved in the activities in the former protest, let's say, what they realized, what we all knew, is that if you want to run an effective protest, you need to have, you need funding, meaning that you need a bank account. You cannot just, it's nice to have WhatsApp groups of thousands of people, but how would you, buy t-shirts, or how would you print posters? So you need some funding, you need some lawyer support, someone who will tell you, you can do this, you cannot do this, this is legal, this is not. You need some PR support, you need logistics, you need to be able to, anyhow. So they formed what is called the headquarters of the protest. I'm part of it, aiming at enabling all the different groups to actually protest, to conduct their own protest, not saying to the different groups what to do, but provided that they're all working under the same set of morals and values, all working towards democracies, and just to support them and allow them to work. Over 200 different organizations are registered under this headquarters. Not all of them need support at the same level. The high-tech, for instance, groups are highly organized by themselves, but they also part of the headquarters because we also try to coordinate activities. So what you see is a real grassroots organization from the point of view that people just emerge from the bottom, but it is well organized because support is given to these groups to enable their activities. And this is the combinations that you see. It's actually quite amazing. I mean, you get a phone call from, a social worker one day saying, look, I have to start a group of social workers. So we say, go ahead. And then the day after, she comes back saying that more than 80% of the Israeli social workers are actually now in one day organized to a group, and they are now, part of the active groups. And likewise, you see it in tons of different things. So this is from the point of view of organization. I can answer question. I can also maybe just, say all the things that I wanted to say. I want to be, I'm not sure how familiar people worldwide are with what is actually going on here. So what needs to be understood, and it was actually stated by Yariv Levin a couple of weeks ago, he was caught, saying that had their original set of rules would pass, the meaning of that would have been that the courts or the justice system would have been placed like below or being controlled by the government. And given that the parliament is already controlled by the government, and it actually means that the government would have controlled the two other authorities. He said that himself, after preparing this coup for 20 years, and after 10 weeks of people in the street being called anarchists, being called whatever you can imagine by our government. And then he come and said that, and the meaning of that is basically, that Israel democracy is dead. This is what he was saying, and now it's not much different than that. Just to say that what we know today after 18 weeks in the street, but we knew it already before, is that the Israeli government, within its ideology, is to change Israel from a liberal democratic country into some sort of dictatorship, or whatever we would like to call it. It's not, not necessarily, there are different, names for that, but some sort of a dictatorship with very strong religious flavor, I would say, some Jewish fascism in it as well. So this is what they want to do. This is within their ideology. We know that this mask have been, fallen. You cannot take it back. This is who they are. We know that this is what they want to do. We also know that they are willing basically to sacrifice the country in order to achieve or to fulfill their ideologies. They are willing to sacrifice the Israeli economy, the Israeli high-tech system, the Israeli education system, healthcare system. We also know when Gallant, the Minister of Defense, came and said, look, if we are continuing this way, we are putting Israeli safety at risk, because tons of groups from the military have said that they are not going to follow or they are not going to serve under a dictatorship, that they are going, they were trained, they signed a contract with a democratic country to save a democracy or to protect the democracy, but not to protect the dictatorship. That made a huge difference in the entire protest. But what, as I said, so we know that they are willing, as the Minister of Defense himself said that they are willing to sacrifice Israel's security. Netanyahu fired him after saying that, right? He fired his own Minister of Defense for saying, putting up the flag, raising the concern or the threat. And they are willing to sacrifice our soldiers' freedom. So they will be subject to sue at the Hague court and so on. So these things are known and they cannot be taken back. This is who they are, this is what they want to do, and this is what they're willing to sacrifice. Which is, something that you from that point of view, Professor Yuval Noah Harari said it nicely, the border has been crossed, we cannot take it back, even if tomorrow morning they decided to cancel everything, which they don't, by the way, but even if they do say that, we know how fragile our system is, and we know who they are. And given that this is who they are, they will always continue to try to push for that. But the other thing that we have learned, on the contrary, is that when we unite, and we have been united, the majority of Israel, you have to understand, you see it in all the polls, more than 70% of the population in Israel support the protest, either because they completely disagree to the judicial overhaul, or because they do not agree with the way it is being carried out. So we know that when we unite, we can actually prevent them from doing that, but it's highly non-trivial, and it's really demanding. And this is why I think we see so many people in the street. We came up basically from the early days with two demands. First, get rid or completely remove all the rules. It's not just the judicial overhaul, there are about set of 150 different rules. None of them, if you look at them, none of them is for the benefit of the entire population. They are all either sectorial, either racist, all kind of really awful things. You can go one by one and see that none of them is for the benefit of the country, including, of course, the judicial overhaul. So that all of it need to be completely removed from the table. And the second thing is that and as I said, they did not do that. We are a couple of hours away from completing the legislation in part of those rules because of how the system is working. And the other thing that we demanded is that they will agree or declare that any deep or depth changes in the constitutional structure of Israel will be made with broad consensus. And they also disrespect. So they are now discussing and negotiating under the president like umbrella But what they keep saying is that if they don't reach broad consensus, that they will continue with the legislation, and they do progress with many of these rules, the smaller one or the largest one. So they do not appreciate, they do not accept the basic ingredients that the changes need to be done with broad consensus. Of course, they will be happy to get it, but so basically our demands have not been recalled, since we are only a couple of hours away from completing the legislation. What we are actually now saying that it's not enough that they say that, okay, we stop. It's not enough. You either have to withdraw it completely, but we also want them to come up with a new set of rules that strengthen the weaknesses of our structure. We need to make sure that from that point on, again, as Yuval Noah Harari said, that there are two ways we can only move forward. We cannot go back because of what we know. So it either we go to enrich very dark days if they succeed, or that we will find ourselves forcing the changes such that the Israeli democracy will strength will be enhanced or secured for the future. And I think that I spoke enough.
That was great, thank you. But that's a perfect spot. We've got a lot of good questions coming in, but I think well, two things. I just want to clarify for folks who are listening, when you were talking about being a few hours away from these changes going through, that doesn't mean that it is going to happen in a few hours. What that means is that they've gone through readings in the Knesset now where it would only take a few more hours of Knesset action to push those. So those aren't imminent today, but they could be anytime. And then, the question I have for you, or the first one, because I have a lot of them, honestly, but the first one is, the protests. We talked about sort of how impressive it is, having mobilized hundreds of thousands of people in all of these different sectors of Israeli society coming together. But obviously, the protests are not the end, right? They're a means, they're a way to try to get us to something. So, I guess my first question to you is, how do you think about the goal, the end for the protest? What are you trying to accomplish with this movement?
Yeah, so I think that we can talk about different layers or different levels. The most basic one is what I just said. The two original demands of the protest, if they are fulfilled, it will end, as far as I'm concerned, at least the protest itself, the activity in the street, because the risk will be removed. And this is completely dismiss this set of rules and make sure or agree or commit or take the right action needed in order to ensure that from now on, depth changes in the structure can only be made with broad consensus. So if these two things are fulfilled, then I will not, find the need to go out to the street more than once a week, every week for that long. This is, I think, the most basic layer of it. But I think that what is happening is of course deeper than that, because as a Democrat liberal Israeli, as you said, we were sort of as a very passive people, which was true. We didn't like what we were seeing that is becoming out of the country. But you have to understand that there is a very effective, like we call it, poisoning system that Netanyahu built to tear the country apart, in the sense that, people kind of fear to say what they feel. If I tweet on Twitter, you read the response to that, the amount of that, and the personality that is coming from, and so on, you really see it's the violence over there. So they really made us feel that we are like a small, weak minority or whatever. You were looking at, someone told me in the street that for years, he was actually one of those that for years protested, and he was thinking all the time, so where is everybody? Am I the only person? And all of a sudden you see everybody. It's like pluralistic ignorance at its depths, if people are familiar with this term. So we felt that we are really I don't know. So it was easier for all of us to, to be with our families, to push forward our careers, We lived in some sort of a bubble. And what this protest is showing is that people do care. We are the vast majority of the people, and the face of Israel, the real face of Israel, is what we were actually thinking of them. It's not I don't know, all the, I don't know, I don't want to use these terms, but it's not Netanyahu and his like group of supporters, violent, ignorant, and whatever. These are really not the majority of Israel. To some extent, they you know, they got control over the government, fine, but this is not what Israel is all about. And this is seen in the street. So I think that the next step would be, and this is going to be super, super challenging. First of all, we have to win the current battle. It's clearly the most important thing. But even if we do that, we will have to somehow make sure that I would call it the watershed that the protest is showing, that separate between, you know, normal, decent people to those who are highly extremist, fascist. So to show that those are the two different camps that we have, and that the majority sits in the camp of, I call it the normal, but you can also call it to some level Democrat liberal, but not sure. I mean, it's a bit complicated when you think of the different subgroups in Israel, but I would say that the majority of the Jewish Orthodox are interested in living in a normal place, right? They don't want to live in a place where the corruption and violence and so on is everywhere. So I think that the protest is showing that. But unlike, you know, the political system where the watershed is still divided and fixed and set by the, you know, exactly where Netanyahu wants it to sit, between left and right, and us and they, and first and second Israel, and so on and so forth, Jewish and Arab, no matter how you want to, you know. So we need to make sure that we keep the camp of normal people as a single camp, and to drag the discussion into that. And if, you know, and then in the much longer term, what we should do is to define the set of values and morals and the backbone of Israel for the future generations to come. Because this is what, at the end, this is what it's all about. What kind of country we want to raise our kids at, and what is, you know, what kind of Israel do we want to see? And I think that the majority wants to see a normal Israel. I mean, the protests show that very clearly.
Yeah.
Shikma, I wanted to ask you about what we already have some questions in the Q&A, and as you can imagine, you were on an Americans for Peace Now webinar. Quite a few people asked about what they call the elephant in the room. In other words, the issue of the occupation. I'm in Jerusalem at the moment. I've participated in 2 of the demonstrations here in Jerusalem, and I can tell our viewers that the occupation theme is very much present. My question to you is, how do the organizers deal with this agenda? Is the anti-occupation agenda welcome? And then a second question, which I think is more interesting, is whether this incredible energy that we see on the streets could serve to boost, to kind of turbo boost the anti-occupation movement in the future, once perhaps the issue of democracy and you know, the legal overhaul is settled in some way.
So I have to say that I don't see it as the elephant in the room, in the sense I know that there are certain groups who think that every bad thing that we see in Israel is a result of the occupation. I don't think that this is the case. I think that it is a thing that we have to resolve. But I also have to say that there are other groups in Israel that have been, let's say that the former Israeli democracy did not do just with them. So one of them are the Arab population. It's of course an extreme example. I'm not trying to say that it's not, but we also have inside Israel many different groups that have been left behind in the former democracy. These are all kind of peripheral areas the Jewish Orthodox communities, the Israeli Arab communities, and so on. I think that what we are seeing right now is a different groups, the Ethiopian community, by the way, many different groups that have been really left behind. So this is why, by the way, we are not seeking going, back to how we were 20 years ago. It's not about that. It's about restructuring the country for the future, because 20 years ago was not good enough, apparently. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been where we are today. And also, concretely, if you look at the facts, it wasn't good for many different groups. So the way that I see it right now, Israel, that with the protest, we are, as I said, defining the camp, defining the setting the watershed clearly. I think that the different groups within Israel will have to set their groups. For some reason, for a reason I do understand, it was always said that if the liberal parties in Israel wants to win, they need to join forces with the Arabs. But I don't think that all the Arabs are liberal in that respect. So this watershed drawing will have to, and as I said, it's not trivial, it's not guaranteed, but ideally each group has to redefine itself and structure on the two sides of this watershed. And then with the normal people, we can then decide how to do. I definitely agree that one of the first things to solve is the issue of the East Bank, or the West Bank, sorry, but there are different ways to solve it. What we want to make sure is that when we get to a decision of how to solve it, the discussion will be done in under democratic rule of the games. And then I'm not sure that I agree with, I'm certainly not sure that I agree with all the protesters in the street of what would be the best solution. On the other hand, I don't claim that my idea about the solution is the best one. I don't have all the information. So there could be different ways to solve it. I definitely think that, what is going on in the occupied areas and so on, it's mostly occupied people, not areas, as far as I'm concerned, at least. This has to be resolved, but I don't think that it can be resolved before we define who we are. Because if we end up as a non-democratic country, then who cares about what's going on? The government, the regime will not care about the other. Just all of us will be living under some sort of an occupation in this respect. So this is how I see it. I think this does not mean by no chance that I ignore all the other dramatic and important and critical problems that we have, but they are all at one level, and we are dealing with the rules, defining the rules of the game and the backbone of the country. Again, even if we win, it doesn't mean that we will succeed, and even if we win, it doesn't mean that we will solve later all the problems rightfully. But without winning now and resolving those issues that we are dealing with right now, I don't think that there is a chance to resolve anything else. But this is my opinion only.
Thank you. So we've got a lot of good questions coming in. I want to take one from Susie Gelman, who's with us today, who's asking about, as we're going into summer, we know Netanyahu said, okay, we're pausing the process. And as you said earlier, he didn't say we're pausing it and let's all negotiate from the beginning. He, of course, said we're pausing it, but we promised to do exactly what we said. But he clearly did so in an effort to sort of take the wind out of the protest movement, right? And I would say the good news is we've seen still hundreds of thousands of people coming out. But are you worried about this strategy on his part to sort of drag it out? We're going into summer, it's hotter, people are doing different things, they're traveling. How are you thinking about that strategy on his part?
No, we are certainly worried. This is what we call the Polish or Polandist ways of making a judicial coup. If you're familiar with that, you know that in Poland they started with very aggressive judicial overhaul. Then the public respond, they set it back, and then did the same thing, but at a much slower pace. And of course, this is a concern here as well. So I think one important thing is that this alleged discussion under the umbrella of the president will will get to an end, because this is just, wasting the time. If they are discussing and not reaching any conclusion, and not appreciate the fact that they do need to make the changes only with broad consensus, and what is it all about? I mean, the basic, basic principle for that is not fulfilled. But yes, it is a concern. And I'm not sure that we have, I cannot tell what will happen. I think that we are very pleased to see that in the last 4 weeks, apparently there was no apparent reason to continue the protest, because the parliament was on a break, so no rules could be, and still people, hundreds of thousands of them, came every week. And this week we are, let's say, raising up the flames again with midweek activities tomorrow. So I hope it will awaken everything up, but it is certainly a concern. It's highly non-trivial.
We have quite a few questions from our participants, and I encourage people to keep asking. So do it with the Q&A tool that's at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to ask you 2 questions that have been asked by our former chair of the board, Marty Bressler, who's with us. By the way, it's a different Bressler. We checked; it's not yours. So Marty's asking first. What is your answer to charges that have been made that the protest is instigated and supported by Americans, American money, American organizers, and so forth? And then the other question,
also,
and the American government, well, yeah, there have been such charges as well. That's true. And then the other question has to do with the issue of compromise. Do you see some kind of a compromise formula, a potential, possible compromise formula that would satisfy the expectations of your friends and colleagues on the streets?
Yeah, so as for American involvement in funding, of course, it's a big fake information. And in a reality of fake information and fake news, you kind of lose the basis for communication. I do want to say that we run the largest, how do you say, fundraising from the people. It has
crowdsourcing, yeah.
Oh, what?
Crowdsourcing?
Yeah, the largest one ever in Israel on a online site. We got more than 25 million Israeli shekels from about 50,000 individuals with an average donation of less than $50. So this is the amounts that we are discussing. There are other sources which are larger, but all the money, I think the 98% of the money is Israeli money, which is kind of unbelievable, I would say. So this is, but for those who just lie, what can you tell? There is nothing we can tell, but those are the facts, and all the numbers are available for the public as required by Israeli laws. And the second question, please just remind me, what was it?
The second question had to do with the issue of compromise. Can you see some
compromise?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Look, the ability to reach a compromise is it's an excellent ability, but compromise by itself is not is not a value. It's not a moral. So we can never compromise on the values and morals we believe in, like equality, like freedom, like obvious things that are framed nicely under the word democracy. So there is no half democracy. There is no quarter democracy. You cannot compromise on that. But there are, I do have to say that there are different ways to guarantee Israeli democracy. And in this respect, you can compromise on different levels. But the basic concept, we need to be clear that we need to secure Israeli democratic structure for the generations to come. And on that, we cannot compromise.
So one of the things that I think is noticeable and interesting about this protest movement is that it's people like you who've come together to help build this and lead this. It's not been led by politicians. right?
Yes.
And we've seen some of the politicians come out and speak at a protest here or there, but this is clearly not a movement of the political leaders of the political parties. So that being said, what do you think is the role for the folks, for the opposition politicians? Do you think there are people who are effectively engaging in this? And do you see maybe new political leaders and parties or formations possibly coming out of this?
So, and I'm giving my, my personal opinion and perspective on that. I think that, as I said, the political system in Israel is subdivided or divided across a certain watershed. The protest is drawing a different watershed. And if you take leaders from the protest and throw them into the political system, they will be flooded by, the old definition. It's very hard to change terminology. You even, you listen to the radio and you listen to the conversation, and they're still using the terminology which Netanyahu is still working hard to maintain on the same watershed. So I think that certainly new people will come, but the goal would be to change the map such that to shift the watershed. And once this is done, then we will be really winning. Whether it's easier to do it with new parties or by changing the narratives, I think that we will. A global we, not necessarily myself, but all the attempts will be made by different people. I'm kind of sure that there are people who are trying to form new parties. The old parties try to probably recruit or I don't know, to bring in new people that represent more the protest and this. But all of it will have to happen. I just want to say that this is highly, highly, highly non-trivial because we are fighting a very efficient and I even want to very efficient, very funded machine that really works hard to tear the country apart on the exact lines that we have been torn apart in the last 5 years or more.
Or before we go to the next question, I have a little follow up on this. I've seen both some of the current politicians come out and speak, and also some of the previous leaders. Do you feel like, I'm talking about the opposition people now, not the government. Do you feel like they're listening to the protesters? And I know you've talked about how it's different watersheds, but do you feel like they're listening? Do you feel like the protest movement is impacting the political?
Yeah, impacting everything. You have to understand that we had, as I said, we were under this pluralistic ignorance atmosphere. None of us was feeling safe to talk about, democratic values and so on. And all of a sudden, people do feel that they can do that. So teachers in school never spoke in the last years, never spoke about those issues, politics. They're still afraid to do so, but more and more people agree to do that. So the things changes, politician changes, they turn the conversation or the speech or the discussions toward those ideas, but to keep it there will be super hard. I'm trying to say, when you have hundreds of thousands of people in the street, the impact is immediate, but to maintain an impact for the longer term, it's I think, is highly non-trivial.
Great.
I've been following the patterns of the movement now for quite a long time, and I identify here and there some themes that are that have characterized other nonviolence protest or resistance movements in the past. And I'm just curious to know if you're following some kind of examples or patterns or emulating anything that you've seen in outside of Israel.
So there are two separate researches that have been published in the last years about effective movements. One shows that if more than 3.5 or 3.2% of the population are actively involved, actually they're coming from Harvard, I think both of them, if more than 3.5% of the population is involved in the protest, then a good chance that it will succeed. And the second one distinguishes between three different types of movements. One which is polite, like normal protest in Kaplan, the one that we are holding. The second, which is impolite but non-violent. And the third is the violent one. And the impolite, non-violent type of protest is by far the most effective type of protest one could reach. This is also why we are calling for all kinds of different activities. Some of them are being imported from other countries, of course. We can't have to invent everything. But this is why we do that. I mean, we don't want to. No one wants to really block the highway, but on the other hand, no, we are not protesting for the sake of protesting. We are protesting. It's a fight literally for our future, for our life, and we need to win it. So we take every measure that guarantee that. And yes, many different things are taken from wherever we see something that is not like just myself. People do that on their own. So yeah.
Thanks. You know, one of the things you've been talking about in a few different ways is sort of the short-term goals, you know, stopping the judicial coup, and then the longer-term goals of addressing the basis of Israeli democracy. So the short-term, I think, you know, will come to play in the politics, new elections, political parties, all of that. The longer term, you know, when we talk about the basis of American democracy, one of the things that we look to is the Constitution. And Israel, of course, doesn't have a constitution. You know, basic laws. You have other things. You know, is the protest movement, I would say, there's the leadership of the protest movement talking about the concept of a constitution for Israel as a specific goal?
Yes. So, but as I said, there are different ways to secure democratic countries. I also know, for instance, I didn't know it before. I now know that also North Korea has a very, very liberal constitution. So it's not just about having a constitution. It's about the entire system. It's about the essence of judges who actually interpret the constitution and the law. So there are different ways, different mechanisms to ensure that. I'm not an expert in that. I'm far from, actually, I'm really not an expert in that. So I cannot give more depth insight into that, but there are different schemes. Different people are working on different schemes. A constitution would have been great, but by itself is insufficient. So I trust, you know, so this is why I'm keep going back to the idea of redefining the values, the core values based on which the country is defined. Because if we define that, then whoever is within the camp, and they could be more liberal or more the opposite, conservative. And it's all fine. I mean, I'm more on the liberal side, but I'm not claiming that you cannot be conservative by nature. It's fine. It is within the camp. And then a decision and the new structure will have to be accepted by the majority of those people within our camp. And this is why we are fighting. We are struggling on redefining this camp. And this is what the protest is aiming. And I think it will take us also for a brighter future. I think it has to.
We promised you that we won't keep you beyond like 50 minutes. So we'll ask a quick question to end with, and that has to do with what it is that Americans can do in order to help. And before, you know, before you answer the question, I wanted to mention one thing that I think is very helpful, a letter that was just organized by two members of Congress. We have about 20, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hadar, it's I think more than 20.
21 or 22.
Yeah, House members who've already signed it. And it's a letter that actually addresses the Israeli activists and congratulates them and empowers them and so on. And so my question to you is what can Americans who are not members of Congress, the average American, do to support this incredible movement?
So I think that a lot of it is about like explaining what is going on. I'm not sure. I think, as far as I know, that majority of people around you who are, more or less supporting Israel are not familiar with what is going on here. Do not understand that to that level. As I said, what this government ideology is all about and what they are willing to sacrifice for that. And the second thing is that I think that people, as I said, ourselves, we kind of got diverted from Israel. We were living in Israel, but we didn't like what we were seeing. We didn't feel that the face of Israel as they are being presented to the world reflects who we are. And now we show that. And I think it also caused some like divergency of the Jewish population all over the world from Israel. And so I think that this is also an incredible opportunity to try to unite us all back into a single nation that is spread all over the world. I think it's important for the future of Israel. I think it's important for the future of the Jewish communities. It's important for me as as an individual, I think, because this is who we are. This is the people that this is our history, and it's not that we respect that, this is really who we are. So I think that this is a good opportunity to strengthen back the forces, to unite again. And I think that it also give us strength here to continue, because it's, as I said, it's not none of us wants to do it. We are just dragged into do that, forced to do it by them. And of course, all kind of funding is always useful. We are probably heading to a very long battle here. It's not going to end in a second, and running continuously 18 weeks already in a row protest is costly. So I think, what money is like the trivial thing, but I think that there is really a deep opportunity here, and we should take the opportunity and help it happen, because what we were seeing around the world, how the young Jewish generation feel towards Israel is not so far away from what we were feeling toward the country in so many levels. And this is really not what the country is about. We see it really everywhere. And I think that as a nation, we can be proud and we can take this opportunity.
Shikma, thank you for that. Thank you for everything that you are doing. I think, all of us here in the US share the goals, and we're spending our days and our time, working to try to see a better future for Israel, for Palestinian neighbors as well. But like you said, that core democracy, that core function of the country is an essential. And I just want to thank you again for really stepping up and stepping into this leadership role. We're glad that you were with us today.
There are many, just to say, there are many grassroots leaders on the streets. I happen to be more familiar in the last days, but it doesn't mean much. There are really hundreds of thousands of people, more than 2 million Israelis who are actively participating. It's an incredible number.
Well, please give them all our thanks, and know that, from here in the United States, we stand with you, and I will be there again soon. I'm sure many others on this call will be there again soon, and we will be with you. So thank you, Ori, thank you, and thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you all.
Bye-bye.